morning, Garrick. How are you doing, buddy?
Buenos dias. I'm doing good. We're starting the school year here in Spain.
Dude, everyone's going back, even though Corona's not over.
Yeah,
is that a touchy subject in Spain? Do people get all up in arms about? Do they have their opinions if we should or we shouldn't?
There are some people. There's been some protests, but it's pretty mild. I think most people, are just ready to get their kids back to school.
Please, can we get them out of the house?
Can we please have some help here? So I think so. There's a little bit, and more it has to do with. It's not necessarily that they're going back. It's more of like, okay, well, what's the process? What if a kid gets sick in a school and the thing is, in Spain it's August and everyone's on vacation. So literally the government, the schools, everything's on vacation, and they didn't necessarily have the plans already. So then it's like it's September, and we're running, but they're doing an amazing job. I mean, I'm really happy with the schools we're in and the way they're processing it and everything. But it's always you're just kind of used to that. You're just kind of used to August. I disconnect. September 1st is like everyone sends you an email, and so in general, I think most people seem fairly positive. Okay. And in fact, the other day we had a Zoom call, and one of the parents even said, he said, "You guys are doing a fantastic job," which is very odd to see.
Wow.
Public praise.
Right.
He said, "You guys are doing a great job. I really thank you guys for all the hard work." So
that's really cool.
Yeah. So I generally now, of course, you've always got a few people who, rightfully so, are concerned about stuff and also want to make a big deal about it. So
I did see that there was a female who was pulled out of the ocean in
San Sebastian, right?
San Sebastian, surfing because she had tested positive for COVID and refused to quarantine herself.
Yeah, she got fined. Yeah.
So it was awesome to see the people just in complete like hazmat suits walking into the ocean to try to get her to come out, and she refused to come to the shore. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
Viva
yes. Viva yo, yeah. Yes.
Oh man. Well, listen, in Sweden, we've been at school for a month. As far as things are going, cases aren't going up.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting thing. My son, though, granted, basically, I was talking with one of our buddy, Michael Medital, down in Stockholm, and his kids have been home for a while because they were both got colds, and so they couldn't go to their school. And basically, it turns out that if your kid ends up getting sick, everyone ends up missing about 2 weeks. Because in Sweden, if you have any symptom whatsoever, they're just like, stay at home, don't risk it. And you can get tested. Testing is much more available than it was early on. But it just ends up meaning that there's just tons of kids missing and personnel. What do we say that? Personnel. That seems like it should have been an easy word for me to be able to translate over from Swedish. So anyway, so my son Quinn, he's been home all week because he has a slight drip in his nose and a slight cough that in the morning when he wakes up for about the first 3 hours, he coughs every 10 minutes. And then for the rest of the day, he's fine.
He's fine.
So he looked at us today. He was like, can I please go to school?
Yeah,
he was dying. He is not,
and
doing well.
Exactly. I think what you're seeing globally, at least where I'm seeing, is like at some point people are like, I need to live my life. Mm-hmm. Right. And so you're trying to balance between the dangers of the world we live in versus like normal life. And that was the thing that I think was so fascinating about this pandemic was it for a lot of people it shut down normal life. Right. I think for some people it didn't, depending where you live, where you were. You talk to people who live in rural Spain, they're like, oh, I just couldn't go into town anymore. But otherwise, get up, milk the cows, do this stuff, talk to my neighbor. It's pretty normal. So you just see people need normalcy, need to be around other people, need to so it's interesting.
Well, so for me, because this may really just launch us into, I think what we can talk about, but there's so much here that gets highlighted. And there's a lot of wrestling going on. Okay. So early on, everyone was like, pivot, This is changing everything. The world will never be the same.
Well, there was the one guy. There was, was one guy saying, "Well, the university will be done. It'll all be online."
Right.
And
some universities are going online. Here in Sweden and Stockholm, only first year students, and also university here, only first year students are showing up to classes. Everyone else is online.
Yeah.
And then it's only for like the first month that they're in classes, and then they'll be online. So basically we're going to kind of usher them in, get them used to how things work, and then we're going to turn them loose online.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about this is that they're unsure, and they've stated, we're not really sure how this is going to go. So they're liking how much money they're saving, but they're not sure that the quality of education, they're wondering how much of an education is someone going to get. Now, here's the thing. If you are, right, so let's take, if you're a student and you say, oh, I graduated from Harvard, and they're like, well, what year did you graduate? Oh, well, I graduated, or I started, in 2020.
Yeah.
Oh, so you did the whole online Harvard. Like, it's like what Harvard brings you is access to these people. It's the rubbing shoulders. It's the social community. It's all these things.
Exactly. Yeah.
It seems to be intangibles. Now, I'm not making the case that therefore we need to put people's lives in danger or anything else because Harvard. There's some of that eliteness of Harvard that probably needs to die in institutions like that. Yeah. But it's hard because at the same time, here in Uppsala, where I live, you can't, if you don't have a student ID or a faculty ID, you can't get into any of the buildings. So they've completely locked them off. So it's this really interesting, everyone's pivoting and the world is changing.
Yeah.
I think, and I want to get what your thoughts on this. Where I'm struggling is my verdict is out as to whether or not this will continue for forever. Yeah. So I had a woman tell me the other day, she's 76 years old, and she looked at everyone and she said, let me live my life. Yeah. I don't know how many more years I have. Yeah. I'm not going to sit in my home waiting for this thing to pass, and I might die of loneliness. She's like, I'm going to take my chances. I'm going to see my grandkids. I'm going to, and there's a lot of people who are beginning to say that. So I think I struggle with early on. I came out pretty, well, let's just call it knee-jerk reaction, skeptical of the world is changing. And I get that the world's changing. It's kind of like 9/11 and security. But at the same time, there is this humanity has a desire. Mm-hmm. So I see leanings going back towards, maybe we have to just take the risks.
Yeah. Well, no, I think you're dead on. And I think what a lot of most thinking, not everyone, I think there's some people who are obviously trying to be early adapters, early leaders in this area, because it's a possibility that if you get in early, if you can guess a trend and get in on the early side of it, you make a lot of money, right? So some people, but I think what you're seeing, that you look at the tech stocks are like, kind of shooting up and down, and you're like, well, Zoom and and all this stuff, so money's being made, but that's in the long haul. I mean, they've been talking about, for instance, Uber and Netflix as these big disruptors. Those are companies who still haven't made a profit, in a lot of ways, even in their own, when there wasn't any type of issue going on. Netflix has definitely benefited from what's happened with COVID. Everyone's staying home and watching Netflix. But I think what you're getting at, though, is the other issue is that humans, we are made for community, and most healthy human, we're in the image of God, in the triune image. We're people who are meant to be around other people, meant to interact with people, meant to touch people, hug people. That's just normal humanity, and so we're not going to get away from that. We're not going to pivot away from. Although I think that there's obviously people arguing for that, or saying maybe that's the future is all technology, and I just don't.
No, I
don't think so.
Even in Estonia, they touch people.
Yeah, eventually.
I mean, if they're forced to. But I just see that's where I go. But so I'm really processing through, because I don't want to be I don't want to be closed-minded, and I don't want to see.
Yeah.
I'm not really interested in being, let's say, a first mover in order to, for strategy's sake or whatever else.
Yeah.
I think sometimes in life, and this is where this is a little bit of a change for me, because I am I think future oriented. Yeah. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a strategic thinker, but I'm starting to see, sometimes you just got to let the dust settle a little bit and try to figure out, okay, how can we make a path forward here? But it's interesting because I'm seeing, like, okay, so for example, online, right? So when this first happened, everyone was like, oh my gosh, you got to invest heavy in online because, our church services are blowing up and we're seeing all this and that and the other thing. And now no one's watching those services online anymore, or they're seeing a huge dip in some cases. I'm sure that there are cases where they're continuing to go up or maintaining. So it worries me a little bit that maybe sometimes we're ready to throw all of our eggs into one basket. And maybe that's not the best case, because people are still going to want to, one example that I would have is like, okay, so the plague happened throughout European history, and it was a terrible, and all this stuff. Babies were still made. Like, so here you have this terrible situation in which people are dying, but yet society is still going on. Now, I'm not saying that therefore we need to be nonchalant about these things, but human behavior seems to say, I want contact with other people.
Yeah. Well, and since you and I are we work with university students. I mean, if you look at the university system and why it's set up, right? Because this universities haven't existed forever, and there, and there may be someday when there isn't universities. But if you look how universities are set up, there's the value that what you pay for, specifically in the United States, and I don't believe the United Kingdom, is the whole experience, right? So you choose Texas A&M, and part of that experience is going to football games. Part of that experience could be joining a fraternity. Part of that experience, and so in that we understand education is more than a transactional model, right? Universities were set up to educate the whole person,
right,
in a community aspect, and so I don't know why you would want to get away from that. I realize it's gotten expensive and there's some things, but burning down the whole system so we just all sit online, I don't think is the answer to a lot of that. And I do think too that a lot of the decisions that are being made are based on the assumption that this will end, that a vaccine's coming, that a treatment's coming, that herd mentality is coming, and eventually, because most universities, if they were to, no one's going to pay $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year for their kids to stay at home and watch lectures online. That's so that's why I think the pivot thing is important. There's certain things, but that means also you got to be pivoted to go back, because at some point, I think pretty much any health expert right now is saying, this may last a while, but it will end. We will have to go back
one way or the other. I actually read
one way or another.
Yeah. I say, but here's
pivot in the moment, make the change in the moment. But for me, I'm like, okay, when do we go? When and think about the Catholic Church or very liturgical churches where the communion is very important. I mean, I would believe communion should. We've done it at home through our church. It's like, okay, that's great, that's cool. God's big, but the power of one of the powerful elements of communion is that you're in a room with a body of believers who all believe the same thing, and there's a physical, there's no way we can lose that. That if we lose that, and I'm trying to be as little mystical as less mystical as I can possibly be, although I would probably lean more towards a kind of a Catholic thing going here, not too Catholic, but that there's something going on there for us as Christians in a group. If that group is just 5 people, but right. In a group and taking the Lord's Supper, taking his blood and body, and saying we are unified with him and with each other.
Right. Okay. So a couple of things to all of that. One, I totally agree with the idea of community, communion. Mm-hmm. the aspect of remembering and proclaiming together is harkens to First Peter and the idea that we are a priestly nation. So that and when he says nation, he's not referring to Israel, he's referring to the church and God's formation of the church in the world, and that it stands to be a priest to the world and in the world. And so we have to do that together. I think that that's a body aspect, and online it's just not the same.
No.
I'm fairly convinced, and I have no sign. I am not a scientist, and I didn't sleep at a Holiday Inn last night. but I do think that there's some kind of pheromone or something that happens. There's like something that in the room when you are with people, there's chemical reaction. We've kind of said that before. I don't know what it is, but it's an intangible thing. Yeah. And I think that definitely among the community of believers, that when we are together, it is special and it is important. And it is that remembering that Christ has risen, Christ has died, and Christ will come again. Yeah. And how important that is, but that we're doing that together. And I think even more so in an age where everyone is beginning to feel isolated, that is a message to the world of community and the beauty of the church, that it is this weird place where, we were having an elders meeting at church last night, and we were talking about, the fact that the church is one of the few places left in society where all generations congregate. Yeah. So it's not just cultures. Like we talk a lot about, how diverse is your church? But it's the reality, especially with our church, is we have, children from 0, and I think our oldest member is in their late 90s, and we have everything between, and that's 500 people. So here's one of my thoughts that I'm beginning to really mull over. Early on in this epidemic, a lot of people were saying, okay, you've got to be online. And I don't have a problem with a church or a ministry going, hey, what's 100%. Our online tools? Yeah, that's the world we live in. It's like saying, that's where like all these Christian publications grew up, because of the printing press. You had Christian newspapers and everything else. Yeah. So and you did that because people read newspapers. This was how they got information and processed things. So you produced those. And the same way, you need to be online because that's, amen. We're trying to make strides towards that. And I would actually argue, Christian organizations and churches need coders and content makers.
Exactly.
Because you just have to be doing it. Yeah.
We need the best. We're competing with Netflix. We need some great people.
Well, I mean, we're competing with Tiger King. So that's one thing. We have to build that up.
Yeah.
But it seems, and maybe this was just the people I was listening to, so it might be confirmation bias. So I'm willing to admit that. I'm sure that there's probably hard evidence out there to maybe contradict me. So I'm willing to be corrected if I'm wrong on this. But the tendency seemed to be thinking we can reach more. So people were thinking more. And so it was kind of like, hey, you can increase your audience. You don't know how many people are out there, and there was just this sense of like, wow, this is an opportunity to be online and to do more. And what I'm actually beginning to wonder, as online attendance of churches is dropping, as lots of churches are noticing, wait a second, we're losing people. So we don't know where they're going. We don't know if they're going to another church. We don't know if they've just given up on God. We doubt they're losing their faith, but they're just not around and we don't have connection with them. That seems to me to be a huge problem among bigger organizations and churches, because the bigger something is, you have, unless you're really well organized on a person-to-person level, you're going to begin to lose people. But I have a friend who's a pastor of a church of about 500 people in Texas, and he hasn't lost anyone.
Yeah.
Because early on he said, okay, he went to staff and leaders throughout the church and he said, you're in charge of these 10 people. Call them weekly, call them daily, ask them how they're doing. And what they're saying is their church is actually coming together. And so here's my question. Is it possible that everything is going to be different that was predicted is not that it's going to become bigger, but that everything will become smaller?
Yeah.
That churches will realize, wait a second, maybe we don't need to be about brand. Maybe we don't need to be about footprint and impact, maybe we need to be about being a priest and shepherding the 500 people that God has allotted to us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a fascinating theory, and I think so I think there's a lot behind that too that goes back to things you and I kind of chat about. I will say once again, being online super important. That's where a lot of people are, and that's where we need to have evangelism strategies that reach those people. We 100%. But what you've gotten at is a bigger question in and of itself, is particularly in American evangelicalism. Have we become all about branding? Have we become have we become a society in America and maybe the West that's all about individualism? Good friends of mine who do a lot of work thinking about, and we need to have them on this podcast, but do a lot of work producing, training, thinking about reaching secular people. They define secularism as personal project. It's that my life is about myself and the project of myself. Mm-hmm. And you see very much that's what, and I realize we're going in a wholly different direction here now. This is rabbit trails. That's what the Western society, North Atlantic, Europe, Europe in general, it seems like Australia, New Zealand, North America, and that's starting to penetrate into other parts of the world. But it is about me and what I can do. And I don't know how much the church has really challenged that. And I wonder if COVID is helping churches and maybe even our own selves rethink how we're processing ministry, how we're thinking about ministry, internalizing, and then actually going out there and doing it. Have we lost some of that element of the personalness of it, of loving people one-on-one, and it's just all about program. And once again, I'm not saying programs or big events or whatever; those are good things. But I think what we all understand is that the beauty of using the internet is it moves people towards something, right?
Right.
I think most people know we don't want to have Joe from Wisconsin sitting in his house and never getting out and never talking to another Christian, but he's consuming a ton of Christian material. We want Joe to consume that material, but then move into community, become a member of the church, become someone who's serving. So on, that's obviously where making disciples.
I have about 10 thoughts that are just blowing through my head right now. So one of them, the first is Mark Sayers, who's a pastor and a thinker in Australia. Really smart guy. Did a podcast called This Cultural Moment.
Yeah.
I love Mark Sayers. I'm revisiting some of his stuff, thinking, because I think he puts a lot of. I think at the end of the day, his view of God seems to be tied to. Someone's going to get really upset with me for saying this because Mark Sayers is a bit of a he's a bit of a big guy, but I think sometimes his view of God is tied up with the results of revival. So he really wants to see revival, and I think that's wonderful. But sometimes I wonder, and so he made a comment actually in the beginning of this. He said, "You know what? I wonder if what we've done is if we've become chaplains to the secular mission."
Mm-hmm.
And so what we've done is we've just allowed people to keep doing their secular life, but we've kind of entered in as chaplains to that.
Yeah.
And so he's gone through, and I need to go back and see where he's at today, because that was early on in the whole pandemic crisis, and I'd like to see kind of some of his thinking. I mean, the guy is brilliant. So
yeah.
I don't want to disparage him by the comment of the revival. Sometimes I think we can put all our hopes in revival, and we miss out on God saying, just be faithful.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing. The second thing, and which I've totally lost now, so forget it. We'll come back to it. It'll come back to me later.
Third thing?
No, that one's gone too. There's a sense here of, part of what I'm struggling is what has God called us to do as followers of Jesus Christ that that are true through all times and all histories.
Yeah.
So in all situations through life, no matter where you find yourself, what has he called us to do? And that then begins to inform and shape the way that I live my life, and even maybe even some of the quote unquote strategies that I'm going to take. And I just think that has a lot to inform for us. And to be honest, I think I may have lost some of that in my life of what does God call us to do? Like, I think of your pastor friend in Spain who almost died of
Marcos Zapata,
almost died of COVID, and his comments of people need comfort, people need in this time, they're losing people. His perspective on this was so radically different than so many people's, and it seems to me his perspective was less a strategy and more a priestly function.
No, I think there's something there, because I think, if you look at modern American evangelicalism, it's highly influenced by revivalism. It's highly influenced by business thinking and methods. Modernism, and I think we talked a little bit of this. When you go back into Pas's church planting in the secular West, and so I'm not going to say that's all bad, right? That's the water you swim in. But there's probably a cost to that. There's a benefit to that. The benefit was evangelical American and now global growth was kind of tailed to those things. Not entirely, but it was part of the, getting the message out. I'm not saying that people accepted those things because of that. They accepted Jesus because of who Jesus was, but the ability to mobilize, to get, to do all these big things very quickly, has a lot to do with those elements, or that passion for that, which often then led into numbers and measurements. Which I think what you and I rail against is that the measurements force the people on the ground to have to move into strategies. And I would say, strategies are okay. I'm not against strategies, but what you lose is this core element of like, what is it to be a missionary? What do I do? Some people are what's to make strategies and do stuff and put in, put projects and plans into play. I'm like, I don't know about that. Especially the more I'm in Europe, I realize how simple ministry is, really. Ministry doesn't have to be these big things. And I think it's something you learn when you work at La Fuente de Peregrino, the Pilgrim's Fountain. It's for me, that going there every year always is a reminder, okay, ministry, serving people, loving people, getting the gospel in front of people doesn't have to be this big thing. It's as simple as inviting someone into your house and having a meal with them and asking them the simple questions of, how are you doing? What's going on in your life? How could I pray for you? Those are things that, in theory seem so simple and basic, but change people's lives, change the world, bit by bit. And so, but I think we can lose that. I think there's some people who don't. I think there's some people who are really good at keeping those two things together,
right?
Strategy and then the core of who they are as a person, as a priest to this world. But
we have a real problem.
I think it's tricky.
We have a real tendency to make strategy our horse and our chariot. And that we're going to trust in those things rather than God. And I am first and foremost guilty of that. I'll reference the meeting I was in last night. How many times, this is one of the things that my brothers and sisters in Christ in Sweden have continued to show me, is the importance of prayer. I love how much our church talks about we need to be praying. We need to be bringing this before the Lord. And in both a way of orienting our heart towards him, but also pouring our hearts out towards him and requesting things and praying for the country, praying for people within the church. There's just a sense there of we've got to be a people of prayer. And that's not something that comes natural to me. I am first and foremost a doer. I'm going to, I get it in me to, I've been telling people lately, I wake up with anxious energy every day. So I wake up, up and I go, okay, what's got to be conquered, and for better or worse, I'm learning to, that's part of who I am. And there's a lot of good that comes with that. But there is a reality that I wake up every day now, and I actually take my first hour or so in, well, I try to, it depends on how quickly I can get up. But I'm just quiet and I'm still.
Yeah.
And it's turning into an act of faith because my tendency is just to get going. And once I get going, it's hard for me to be present and to kind of turn that off.
Mm-hmm.
And, but strategy is so much a part of that. I've been noticing how when I'm sitting in the morning, how many strategic things kind of come through my head. Well, what if we did this, and how? And as an act of faith, when those come up, I have to go, okay, Lord, if it's of you and it's good, you'll bring it back. So as an act of faith, I'm going to sit before you and I'm going to be quiet and still and know that you're God.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a strategy to do that. That's just an orientation of my heart and my life.
Mm-hmm. Amen. Yeah.
And it's bending my will for success and my desire for success to the God who is able to move upon men, And so there's something there. I'm not saying we don't need strategy. Of course we need strategy. Of course we need these things. But first and foremost, are we trusting in God who is able to deliver, or are we trusting in the horses and the chariots?
Mm-hmm. I'm reading this book by Henry Nouwen. It's called The Genesee Diary, Report from a Trappist Monastery. Recommended by a friend of ours, Danny, and fantastic book. It's easy. It's short because it's literally diary notes. When Henry Nouwen went and spent, I think 6 months, or maybe 3 months, 3 or 6 months in a monastery. It was when he was quite young. It was before he kind of had some of these profound life experiences in which he began to really, put some of those, write some very profound books. But he talks about how hard it was, because he sounded like he was a doer. He was a, PhD, boom, doing stuff, teaching. He was, top level guy. But when he gets to the monastery, hoping to kind of have this time with God, he realizes how hard it is and how it takes time. It takes these moments of silence. And there's this word I learned, I think it's called nepsis, which which apparently monks and nuns use. But it is the ability to have the word means kind of like sound mind or a still mind or a quiet mind, but it's understanding that you've kind of gotten all the worry, anxiety, stress, all the stuff that just your mind is constantly thinking about, right? Which sometimes those are the stories we tell ourselves that are lies or incorrect, but
right.
or the fears that we have that this is gonna, if I do this will happen, and then we're, it's gonna be a disaster. And talking about how getting to that is that's when you can really begin to pray and listen to God and have and just how hard that is.
Yeah.
And God obviously is working in our lives even when we're not doing that. That's the amazing thing about God. But the effort we needed to put into making that relationship deeper, more profound, I found fascinating. But I wonder how much of our lives, especially in this crazy day and age of it, how much of our lives as particularly evangelical Christians do we have for that? And do we make that a priority? And I know we say those things, we want those things, and I know some people who do that in amazing ways, and obviously we're in a different situation with kids and wives and the busyness of life, but how do we do that? We can't run off to a monastery for more than a weekend.
No, well, unfortunately, but here's a thought on that though, because as you're saying that, I was starting to think, have we pivoted to the right things?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that might be, this is a seminal moment in history where we must pivot. But are we pivoting to the right things?
Are we pivoting to prayer?
Yeah. Like we've been Christianity, has largely been involved with, or at least the traditions I think both of us come from, have largely been involved, I would say with building. Okay. So not physical buildings, but just doing and building and seeing progress and everything else. And growth in busyness, to be honest. I think we swim in a culture of busyness, and therefore we are wet with its waters. And so in part of this, I wonder if the pivot that we should be making, I don't know if we're making it, is to a life that says, you know what? When things go back to normal, we're going to be a different people.
Yeah.
We're not going to be a people that goes to busyness. Step away from the busyness and the chaos that this world is, and let us invite you into a way of peace. That's something completely different. I don't know if we would see more people come to Christ or go, wow, I want to go do that. Because I actually think what you're doing, it's kind of like the busyness that the world is in is a sugar diet. It's a sugar and junk food diet. It's this, it tastes great. It's, your body craves it. You can't, when you sit down and you have a moment of silence, you go, I don't know what to do with myself. I have to pick up my phone. And that's the same thing that happens when you have a person whose diet consists of sugar and empty, chips and everything else, is when they sit down to a good meal, they're, I gotta feed it with, I gotta keep stuffing these things in my mouth. And it's really the person who says, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. And you kind of look at them like, what do you mean you don't drink Coke or, whatever else?
Yeah.
But then you start to see this balancedness, but there's actually going to be very few people in this world who follow that path of eating, so to speak. Yeah. And I actually wonder if in some sense, if we were to go to the way of peace and following Jesus in a completely different way, I'm not saying we all become Trappist monks. I'm not saying, but we say, you know what? We've spent a long time being consumers. We spent a long time being slave to, our mobile phones and, the frenzy of renown, whatever it might be. But if we said, we're going to pivot to a different way of life, the way of life that's grounded in Jesus, that's a non-anxious presence and all of these things, I think we'd be really different from the world. I don't know if the world would think that's attractive, but I think we'd be really different.
We'd be really different. Yeah. Be more pilgrim-like.
Yeah, right? Because life becomes simplified when you're a pilgrim. So here's an interesting, I've been thinking about this. Maybe we close with this pondering.
Sounds good.
Jesus sends his disciples out 2 by 2 into the countryside and the lands and towns of the surrounding countryside in Judea. And he says, don't take with you money.
Yeah.
Take your cloak and go. He's essentially telling them, go and be pilgrims for a while.
Yeah.
Am I off in thinking that he was in some way, now they're not on a journey. They were on a proclamation journey. So that's where it falls apart a little bit. But there's an aspect to the pilgrimage there that he was teaching them. You live by God's provision, nothing else.
Yeah, and you don't know what's going to happen the next day. You get up and you just trust God will get you to the next place, the next situation, which technically really should be a big part of ministry. We don't know what God's going to do through us and around us. We should get up with the humility of going, okay, today I'm going to try. I'm going to serve God. Let's see what happens. And instead, I think we get up and go, here's the plan. Here's the strategic plan.
Right.
I've got it. I've got this under control. Now, I want to be careful because I'm talking about myself. I don't want to necessarily project that onto everyone because I think there's people who get up and do that well. Many people and many great people working as pastors, as in our own organization, who are fantastic at it. But I think it's a danger. It's a pitfall we could fall into.
Yeah. I'm going to build it myself, or we're going to get this going. Look, my motto or the way that I've lived my life is let me push that up the hill. Yeah. And I don't know. I'm starting to see, maybe that's not what God's calling me to. He's calling me to something different. But that's me. I'm not saying things need to be pushed up hills sometimes, and God calls people to do that. So that's not a. Oh goodness! These are what we will call sanctified ramblings, or something. I mean, this is really, at the end of the day, I got no clue what I'm talking about. Things are coming out of my mouth, but I'm trying to follow Jesus as best I can.
If you're out there listening and you're going, what's wrong with these guys? We're just trying to throw some ideas that hopefully would help people think through some things differently, look at things differently, and come to your own conclusions. We're not, but really just from our hearts. So, take what you need, leave the rest.
Yeah, I think this could be. The approach of this podcast could be, let's throw some noodles against the wall and see what sticks.
Yeah. Exactly.
All right, dude. Well, until we, I think that's good for now. Until we meet again, I hope and pray that things are well there. I think it's us. Enjoy the sun and warm weather.
Likewise, whatever helps you in Sweden.
Yeah.
as winter approaches.
Buen camino, my friend.
Buen camino.